This is going to be a pictorial and highly biased timeline of the last 100 years of science. This is in 1929. If there are any cardiologists or interventional radiologists in the room, raise your hands if you know what this picture is. You'll see that there's a catheter snaking up somebody's arm and then back down into their heart. And the somebody can be discerned if you read part of the figure legend, which unfortunately, oh, I guess I can read it here. It says, to get a historical record of this experiment, the investigator says, I had to climb the staircase on foot and return while the probe was lying within my heart. So this is Werner Forssmann doing the first ever insertion of a catheter in what became the field of cardiac catheterization. And 30 years later, it netted him a Nobel Prize. And at the time, it's a good thing there was no IRB. I hope everybody in the audience knows IRB is Institutional Review Board, and that's what the rest of us, I think, are going to talk about and our sort of experiences. Okay. And in fact, not only was there no IRB, but his boss told him not to do it. Okay, so that sort of sets the tone. Now we're going to progress a little. In 1983 in Baltimore, these pictures were made. They're the first ever pictures of the dopamine receptors in the human living brain. And you can learn something else interesting about this figure legend, because at one point it says, an awake 56-year-old Caucasian male was imaged. And the paper is famously written by Henry Wagner and Mike Kuhar and their team, and you can see them looking for the cameras, the Baltimore Sun cameras, at some 56-year-old person's brain. Well, guess what? Henry Wagner was 56 years old, and that's him. So another example of really daring self-experimentation, and also in the sort of beginnings of the IRB era, but I've scoured that science paper 20 times because I use it in multiple classes. There's no IRB approval mentioned, and the only sentence worth noting is, well, just after the baboon was imaged, we did one of the experiments on one of us. And that was it. Okay, now we're going to progress another 17 years I don't know. Okay, 83, 23 years. And hoping to have his own Henry Wagner moment, Evan actually tried to play by the rules in 2006 in Indianapolis, and he went to, Evan is me, of course, went to the IRB and said, look, I want to do this new experiment. It's fabulous. It looks like this. It's so complicated with alcohol and IV alcohol and olfaction, and we're going to discover how dopamine receptors work, and I want to bring my medical imaging class to do it. Give me permission. And the IRB said to Evan, well, there must be something wrong with the slides, because there's nothing on there. And in fact, the IRB failed to get back to me for the whole semester. So the class never got to watch the beginnings of a new experiment. They finally did get back to me, and they, in their brilliance, they said, how's the investigator going to consent himself? Okay. So, being the glutton for punishment that I am, I waited another 16 years, and once more unto the breach, I tried to amend a protocol, because unfortunately, every time you make the slightest change in an IRB protocol, you have to go and get permission. And that opens up a whole can of worms. So Evan said to the IRB, I need permission to add a new scanner, because every now and then we change our equipment. And the IRB said to Evan, well, if you're going to add a new MRI scanner, this is what you have to do. And Evan said to the IRB, I never said anything about MRI. So we've gone from the no IRB to the only, faintly existent IRB to the increasingly invasive and probably pointless or meddlesome IRB. And this resulted in an article, which I'm sure is why I got invited, and I'm not going to read everything that I wrote here except this. One of the sentences I wrote was, when the rules and regulations are illogical and overly burdensome, their primary effect is to dampen enthusiasm and delay scientific progress. And I'll skip my other brilliant words because you can read them online, but I had a wonderful experience a few months ago when I read this article by Peggy Mason in Inquisitive. Is Alice Drieger here yet? She's the editor, so I wanted to thank her. And I felt very much alone until I read some of what Peggy said in her experiences, and she had tried to get something approved, and she said, yet 2 months later, the project and our enthusiasm for it lay dead, slain by the Byzantine process of IRB approval. So at that point, I felt validated, and I wasn't alone in the anti-IRB desert. And subsequently, Peggy, in her wonderful article, so I recommend it to you also, Inquisitive, talks about a patient, this is very important, who has a particular rare disease and wants to spread word of her disease by being named. And yet, and she's very thoughtful and well-informed, informed consent I'm going to come to in a moment. She knew what she was asking for, and yet the IRB said, no, she can only appear in those papers as patient AA. So what are the principles that we have to follow when what are we governed by when we are talking to the IRB? What are our obligations to our human volunteers? And it all goes back to, as many of you know, the Belmont Report. And the Belmont Report is organized around 3 main principles: autonomy, beneficence, and justice. And for the purpose of this talk, you just have to know that autonomy is built on informed consent. So I would ask you, from my very biased short history of the world, was my autonomy protected by questioning how I was going to consent myself? Was Kim, the subject with the rare disease, was her autonomy protected by denying her the ability to have her name in publications? Did Werner Forssmann with the catheter and Henry Wagner with the dopamine receptors really not know what they're doing and had to be protected against themselves? And also, what good is it if the approval comes too late? So here are my thoughts, and then I have a proposal. I'm going, 1 minute, I can do it. Oh, come on. I get extra.
Sorry, keep going, sorry.
Okay, just trying to make her feel bad. Okay, so my thoughts are, is this censorship? I'm not really sure, although I appreciated the definitions in the previous talk. I do know that mission creep abounds and creates interminable delays. Delays kill enthusiasm. Lack of enthusiasm kills science. And overprotection of subjects is a denial of their agency. And here's my proposal. And I want all of you to participate if you like. So I'm proposing the new USC MUD code, for obvious reasons, for the protection of investigators from their IRBs. But I'm very serious about this. And I've organized it around 3 principles. Transparency. All IRB deliberations should be transparent and open to the public. All reviews must be completed rapidly. I would say 2 weeks, just like the amount of time I get to review a paper. All reviewers must be identified by names, and their criticisms must be signed. All investigators have an opportunity to evaluate their IRBs, and all the data should be published every year. That might really work wonders. Second principle, I'm going really fast and using Marcia's time. Risk evaluation. All IRB requests to modify protocols, meaning what they tell me I have to do to get approval, must be justified based on the principles of autonomy, beneficence, and justice. And you have to tell me, you have to tell me why I have to change something. It has to be based on one of those principles or no go. Autonomy is paramount. A subject's informed preferences should be heeded whenever possible. Give deference to the informed volunteer. And finally, the last main concept is limits of risk reduction. Risk is to be minimized while facilitating science. Total elimination of risk is not the goal. Practices not exceeding a predefined, and it has to be predefined, minimal risk threshold are outside the IRB's mandate. Don't go there. Long accepted non-invasive practices, and I think Lee is going to talk about this, generally do not exceed minimum risk, whatever that minimum risk threshold is. It's not the IRB's business. And finally, evaluating peer-reviewed science, which is always the case for me. I've already published the paper. I've already had the grant reviewed. I've already got the money coming. That is not the purview of the IRB. So any of you in the audience, and I hope particularly my co-panelists, who want to get together and write a paper and help me edit and make real principles of these, I'm serious about it. Thank you very much.